The 2006 video game Dead Rising was without a doubt pitched as a playable version of the 1978 film Dawn of the Dead. The influence is so obvious that the publishers at Capcom even felt they needed to clarify on the box that the game is not an official Dawn of the Dead product. When actually playing it, the similarities might seem to be very surface level at first glance. Dawn of the Dead famously uses its shopping mall setting as a critique of consumer culture, while Dead Rising uses the same setting mostly to give the player a seemingly endless supply of wacky weapons and gadgets to use while plowing through the impressively huge zombie hordes. Dawn of the Dead does have some deliberately comedic moments, but is overall a dramatic story. The plot in Dead Rising is also dramatic, but the way it is told and what the game encourages you to do while moving the plot forward leans heavily to the goofy side. The game even keeps you updated on how many enemies you have killed at all times, as if to say, yeah, there's a story, but we all know why you're really here. But make no mistake, both of these works are most definitely about critiquing consumer culture, even if Dead Rising is criticizing a different aspect of it. Look, I'm a Swedish, non-binary, leftist, polyamorous vegan. It's not very often that I get to play a video game that represents me, or any of my specific views. Even less so if it's a high-budget AAA game. So it was really surprising to me to find out that Dead Rising, which is a high-budget AAA game, actually has a kind of pro-vegan message, and it's a message that might be even more relevant now in the 2020s than when the game was originally released. Dead Rising lets you take control of cocky photojournalist Frank West.
Remember that name, because the whole world's gonna know it in 3 days.
After getting a tip that something is going down in the small town of Willamette, Colorado, Frank goes by helicopter to investigate. Shortly after arriving, he realizes he's jumped into a citywide zombie infestation, and he has 3 days, or around 6 real-life hours, to uncover the cause and get back to the helicopter pad alive. And there's no time for slacking off. If Frank doesn't make it to specific places and people in time, the truth behind the outbreak will be lost forever. Well, at least until you reload your save and try again. Long story short, Frank discovers that an old man named Dr. Russell Barnaby was working with the US government to conduct research in the Central American town of Santa Cabeza. The original intent was to find a way to accelerate the production of cattle, to satisfy the increasing demand for meat back in the United States. Instead, they discovered the Ampulex compressa giganteus, a wasp-like insect with the ability to reanimate dead tissue. The insects eventually escaped and started infecting the local population, which was then covered up by the US government, who blamed it all on terrorism. Santa Cabeza was also the home of Carlito and Isabella Keys, who brought the infectious wasps to the United States and released them on the people of Willamette in retaliation. But most importantly, to send a message to the world about what really happened in Santa Cabeza. Isabella is a lot more interested in the latter part of the plan than the former, so when Frank offers to help release the story to the public, Isabella tries to convince Carlito to join the Yankees. He answers by shooting her, and then gives a really awkward apology.
I'm so sorry. I never meant to shoot you. Now I've gone and hurt you.
I'm sorry, sis, but you know how easy it is to mistakenly shoot someone in the shoulder. Carlito is later kidnapped and tortured by an unhinged butcher, and dies from his injuries. The US Army then comes to, once again, erase all traces of a zombie outbreak. But if you are a good little gamer and manage to get the true ending, Frank and Isabella manages to escape them all alive to tell the tale. And this might not actually mean much, since it was originally released 2 years before the game, but there are some interesting details in the game's end credit song, Justified. The chorus could either be read as Carlito and Isabella justifying the spreading of the zombie virus, or maybe it's like the US justifying the research that led to it and the following cover-up? The first verse sure makes it seem like it could be the latter.
You corner me to say, oh, how can you live that way?
Sounds a bit like something Carlito says to Frank in the game. There's also something clearly symbolic about Carlito, who represents the people who are affected by the negative consequences of increased meat production, specifically being killed by a butcher. Like, it's almost as if the people who are killing animals are, in a way, also killing people? But neither Carlito or Isabella are explicitly vegan, and their motive is very obviously revenge and not vegan activism. But they didn't really need to advocate for animal rights for this reading to be valid. In the 1980 film Cannibal Holocaust, a group of documentary filmmakers goes to the Amazon rainforest, terrorizes a local tribe, and then get brutally killed and devoured in return. And I mean, it's kinda hard to feel bad for them when they did things like having sex in a village they themselves just burned down, while the villagers are watching! The film ends with the line,
I wonder who the real cannibals are.
and while it sounds really silly out loud, it makes it crystal clear that the film's intent is to tackle the topic of imperialism, of white people coming to a foreign country to fuck shit up with complete disregard for the people who already live there. Dead Rising doesn't have a memorable line like that, but it does try to say something similar.
Do you have any idea how much meat Americans consume in a single day?
Why was your meat so much more important to you than human life? Why? Why did my people have to die to feed your fat bellies? Aren't zombies great? I mean, all they do is eat, and eat, and eat, growing in number. Just like you good red, white, and blue Americans.
The game could just as well have asked who the real zombies are. Not only is the game rightfully criticizing US imperialism, just like Cannibal Holocaust once did, it also sheds a light on just how horrifyingly huge the consumption of meat was in the United States at the time. In 2005, the year before Dead Rising was released, the amount of livestock consumed per capita in the US was 126.6 kilograms, or around 277 pounds in pretend measurements. That made the United States the third biggest consumer of livestock in the world, according to the 2009 report on the state of food and agriculture, or SOFA, although it's not as comfortable. In short, the report also tells us that the consumption of milk in developing countries had almost doubled, the consumption of meat more than tripled, and the consumption of eggs had increased by a factor of 5 since the 1960s. There was, shall we say, a reasonable worry that these huge changes would come at the cost of such things as poverty reduction, public health, and natural resources. But this report came out in 2009, that's old news. Surely things look a lot better today, right? No, they don't! Global meat production skyrocketed. The amount of slaughtered chickens went up to 68.79 billion. 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions are being made from global livestock, and slaughterhouses have become hotspots for the coronavirus, where employees have to work so close to each other that social distancing is impossible. Oh, and we're also living in an age where antibiotics are about to stop working because we're overusing it, and bacteria is developing immunity. We are all going to die.
When we overcrowd animals by the thousands, in cramped football field-sized sheds, to lie beak to beak or snout to snout, and there's stress crippling their immune systems, and there's ammonia from the decomposing waste burning their lungs, and there's a lack of fresh air and sunlight. Put all these factors together and you have a perfect storm environment for the emergence and spread of disease. If you actually want to create global pandemics, than build factory farms.
Those are quotes from Michael Greger in a Vox article published in April 2020. The writer, Sigal Samuel, also points out that farmed animals are being bred to become genetically identical, due to certain physical traits being more preferable than others, which results in viruses spreading easier because there are less genetic variants to hinder their growth. And these viruses can be zootonic, as in able to spread from animals to people. Like, for example, the swine flu back in 2009. And that virus was estimated by the CDC to have taken in between 151,700 to 575,400 lives. If we abandoned factory farming, the risk of diseases spreading would most likely decrease. But as Greger points out in the same Vox article, if we really want to reduce the risk of diseases spreading, we should start focusing on producing and consuming more plant-based products. And sure, not all ways of producing plant-based foods are equally friendly to the environment, but there are vegan stuff that's more friendly than others. And all of that stuff is still friendlier to the environment than meat products. And may I add, to the billions of animals that we slaughter. In the latest SOFA report from 2019, it says that almost 12% of the world's meat and animal products were lost and ruined in between post-harvest and distribution in 2016. So not only are a baffling amount of animals slaughtered every year, many of them literally die for nothing. Of course, this was not the type of food that was wasted the most, but it was the only type of food that used to be, you know, sentient. But this all begs the question, why do we eat so much meat? Especially since we don't actually need it to stay healthy. The easy answer is that we just like eating it. There's a very primal part of our brains that still gives us a rewarding sensation when we consume something that's so rich with protein as meat. There's also the traditional and cultural aspect. I mean, just take Thanksgiving dinner for example, where you have a turkey as the centerpiece of the whole meal. Or take Swedish Easter, or Midsummer, or Christmas, where we eat meatballs, gravlax, and prinskorv. Meat is not just something that we enjoy eating, but something that we've turned into a cultural staple. We eat meat because we always have, and so we perceive it to be normal. My point here is that none of the actual reasons why people eat meat are because they need it, but because they think they do, or because they enjoy the taste. Same goes for cow milk, which was basically poison for humans until pasteurization was invented. And not even that helped completely, because people are still lactose intolerant to this day. One could argue that Dead Rising isn't trying to say that the entire meat industry is bad, since the critique is specifically aimed at Americans. But the game sure isn't advocating for an increase in meat production, since that is what ultimately led to the original zombie outbreak. And if you're gonna use less animals for food, you're probably gonna need some vegan alternatives. Even if you don't care, or even get angered by what I've said up until this point because you're so anti-veganism, I hope that you will at least listen to the following. Video games don't live in a vacuum. They're shaped by the world we live in, even when we don't notice it. But video games have the potential to shape us as well, if we let them. Regardless if a video game contains a textual or subtextual message that you agree with, there is endless potential in learning new things about the world through video games. When I was done playing Detention, I didn't just put down the controller and move on. I looked up and started reading about the real-life events that inspired the game. Maybe I'm not able to do very much with the information I gained, but knowledge is never unnecessary. Believe it or not, but it's actually kinda good to know things. The broader your understanding of the world becomes, the easier it gets to notice the historical and systemic patterns the world was built on. And if you truly want to change the world, that sure is a good start. Some of you might wonder why I even bothered making a video about Dead Rising if the actual point was just to talk about veganism. Well, the answer is that I probably wouldn't have made a video about veganism like this one if it weren't for Dead Rising. Sure, I was a vegan before I played through Dead Rising, but I didn't become a vegan because of the statistics, but simply because I felt that it was morally right. I thought that if we as a species were able to survive without slaughtering billions of lives, then why do it? Then I played Dead Rising. And when the game asked me if I knew how much meat Americans consumed on a daily basis, I had no idea. Hell, I didn't even know how it looked on a global scale. So, I wanted to find the answer. And here we are. I think it's kind of wasteful to experience a piece of media that tries to convey something it wants you to learn and think about, and then not trying to learn and think about it, especially if the message is so urgent. I have to be honest though. Even though I've talked, and definitely will keep talking about political subjects on this channel, I don't want people to get the impression that I'm a statistical analyst who knows exactly what they're talking about. This video is about what I found, and the point isn't necessarily that I want to convince you. If there's any call to action in this video, it's to be inspired by video games or whatever, to look things up for yourself, and to not let the message go to waste. Regardless of what some of you might think, I'm not trying to say that I am morally superior because I am vegan. I mean, I do believe that you are a kinder and more empathetic person if you care about the lives and well-beings of animals. But being vegan doesn't make me perfect. Looks can be deceiving, right? I sometimes buy new clothes, which were probably made in horrible working conditions, instead of buying secondhand. I buy fast food from companies that mainly make non-vegan meals. I've used those fucking electric scooters more than once. We have to choose our battles, because fighting all of them as one person is really difficult, if not impossible. It's like the comic strip Mr. Gotcha by Matt Bors. Yeah, we do participate in the society that we criticize, but we don't really have a choice but to participate, because we become a part of this society the second we become alive. That's also why the definition of being vegan acknowledges that it just isn't possible for an individual to completely exclude all forms of animal exploitation, because the world we live in at this moment doesn't allow us to. In the end, it's not individual but systemic change that needs to be done to change the world for the better. And for us to be able to push for that systemic change, people need to get informed, and most importantly, involved with the troubles of our time. And it might sound extremely silly to some that video games could spark an interest in supporting various causes, but I mean, just look at the livestream that YouTuber H-Bomber Guy held in 2019, where he played Donkey Kong and managed to collect a shit ton of money for the transgender support group Mermaids. Or look at the fairly recent charity stream where YouTuber Big Joel played Super Mario 64 to support the Bale Project. If video games can make us contribute to and achieve such great things, then maybe it isn't too far out to, for example, be inspired to look up the benefits of veganism thanks to a video game like Dead Rising. Maybe we are the real cannibals, or zombies. But what games like Dead Rising are trying to say is that we don't have to be. Thank you for watching. This video was made possible thanks to the lovely people who support me on Patreon. And I want to give a special thanks to Nichtschwert and Sindri LeRose. If you too want to support the channel, I highly recommend that you also become a patron. It really helps me out, and you also get early access to all of my future videos. And you get access to the Discord server. It's a neat deal, okay? I'd also like to thank Arcrat for once again lending his voice to one of my videos. I recently watched him doing a live stream on Twitch where he played Planescape Torment, and he did all of the voices for all of the characters, and it was absolutely great. He's a true voice actor and a great storyteller, and if you like either of those things, then you must check him out on Twitch. This video was definitely the hardest one to make so far. Not because of the subject matter, but because the camera footage was all blurry when I looked at it afterwards, and that was like 1 hour and 14 minutes wasted. So I had to re-record everything, and that took another 40 minutes. So I really hope you liked this one. And if you liked it, you can also find me on Twitter and Twitch. You know, if you just can't get enough of me. Because who could?